I thought this was a great little post, and this is actually an old post that I caught about 6 years ago, talking about why do guys tend to choose games over their girl. And I remember when I first moved to the city, and you kind of like get that allure of the nightlife. You're finally living in Manhattan, etc. And I went hard. My first year was like, even before I got here, I was already hooking up with girls before I even had any furniture in my apartment. And then you go out here. I live really close to where all the bars are, and so you could just literally toss on some clothes, walk down the block, and you're already at the bar scene. You're already in the middle of the nightlife, not too far away, living from the city. And I did that probably, I would say, for like a good 8 months. And after a while, I was like, eh, kind of like got over it really quick. The allure, everything that you thought, or at least I say everything I thought it was going to be, it was okay, it was enjoyable, but it wasn't something that I could sustain. There was no real like depth of enjoyment. And so from that, I ended up moving away, trying to have more relationships. But unfortunately, when you live that kind of a lifestyle where you go from woman to woman to woman, it becomes a little bit more difficult to actually have solid relationships. And so I find myself going back, doing the exact same thing of just hooking up. And then I said, you know what? I remembered before moving to the city how I spent a lot of time playing typically online video games, more typically MMOs. I spent quite a bit of time playing MMOs. And so I can actually agree with what most of the guys here would say is that if you screw up in the game, you just reload and forget. It says, we screw up with you, we got to hear about it for the rest of our life. And I thought this was good for some men who maybe have this difficulty, especially if you're in perhaps a long-term relationship. This person says, maybe if y'all offered a little loving more often, it would sweeten the pot. And that's pretty true. I mean, sometimes when you get involved, men think that, well, if I settle down, get into a long-term relationship, I'm going to be clapping them cheeks all day. And then you come to find out that sometimes that just isn't the case. A lot of times women are looking for that sort of beta male provider, or they're looking for someone who's a nice guy and try to formulate some sort of a relationship with. And for a lot of men, sometimes you're just looking to have a good time. And some women are like in it for the long haul. The girl that perhaps you hooked up with at the club is now telling some other guy he needs to wait 3 months. And so for a lot of men move over into gaming. Not to mention the fact that for a single man who doesn't necessarily have a family, you don't have a long-term relationship, you don't have any kids, the real motivation to kind of drive you to push out there and push into your career isn't really there, because realistically speaking, for most men, they typically live a simple life and find enjoyment. Not so much when it comes to women. Women typically want things. Everything seems to be about what have you done for me lately? And for a lot of guys lately, that's not as appealing, especially because women are not as enjoyable to be around as they used to be maybe in the past. Who knows if that it was even the case, but at the very least, they weren't more of the left leaning that we have to deal with today. And so for many guys, they've decided, you know what, maybe I'm not going to go that route. I'll deal with these individuals sparingly, and I get to hang out, with the guys, a night of raiding, good times. That's another thing to keep in mind, is that a lot of the spaces that typically were for only men are typically viewed down upon. Society says, there shouldn't be any of these, super, masculine, macho areas where men can get together and kind of uh, shoot the shit, as they say. And unfortunately, a lot of those areas have been attacked. Many men have been looked down upon for wanting a space just for themselves, and women are always constantly invading into male spaces. That the online world of gaming is a great spot for many men who have chosen to go that route. Not only that, of course, there was a nice article here talking about how, even scientifically speaking, according to the it was a study here from Stanford Medicine, talked about video games actually activate reward regions of the brain in men more than women study finds. And of course, it took both men and women, and it basically said, well, women, of course, were more inclined to actually get the game, but it made the point that men were a little bit more likely to push themselves to succeed. And so a lot of times where men are typically competitive, if they're not competitive in the financial world. Maybe they're competitive in sports. And we're seeing nowadays that there are many men who enjoy being competitive, for example, in online video games. And we've seen even in that genre where women have tried to creep into that area, and then there have how many times have there been studies, or it's not fair, or you're excluding the other gender, etc. And many men are just like, okay, come on in. And then these poor ladies try to compete with men, and it doesn't go the way that many think it should. As it says here, it says uh, males were just a lot more motivated to succeed. And that's just the case. Men are typically competitive with one another. And as a result, it shows itself basically in every way, shape, or form. When you're at the gym, whether you're working with somebody, playing online games, there's a lot of competitive games. I mean, shoot, you look at Twitch, the most popular games on Twitch are typically competitive games. World of Warcraft PvP games. Like, you look at things, for example, like Apex Legends, Valorant, Call of Duty, etc. A lot of these games, League of Legends, that are typically Smite. I mean, you can just go on and on and on. And typically, the most popular games that typically do well, especially on things like Twitch or on YouTube, are typically PvP related games. Unfortunately, lately, what we've been seeing is this very watered down, handheld sort of PvP. And it's why typically most of these games fail. When I look back maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago, and I look at some of the online games, they were far more competitive than they were today. And it's more than likely because the previous generations, or I should say that the new generations, are more about the participation prizes. You have a lot more men that are being raised by women, so they really don't have that desire to succeed. They end up feeding off of that female sort of nature, where everything is kind of given to them, which is why you have so much of a entitled attitude even among many young men. I can't tell you nowadays. I get into a lobby where I'm playing a group game, maybe of Smite or another video game, and the moment something goes wrong, it's like your teammates just go to shit. They just start shit talking you. They're like, "You saw, I'm gonna report you," and it's like, bro, it's just a game. Like, relax. And it's not even like the other individuals are doing well. There isn't this sort of let's pull the team together where someone says, "Hey, let's pair up, let's get together, let's push, fall back, etc." Right? There isn't that leadership sort of role that individuals might experience when it comes to gaming. That was very different, when I was growing up. When when you were playing gaming with strangers, you were typically encouraging one another. We got this. Even on the sports teams, I used to play a lot of sports growing up, going to different parks with a bunch of my buddies. And when stuff went bad, we didn't sit there and talk crap to each other. We would encourage each other. Someone would take a leadership role. If you weren't doing well, someone else would pick up the slack. They'd be like, "I got you, don't worry, let's do this." Fortunately, that isn't the way it is today. We definitely do need to go back to those days, I should say. And here is a good point. It says most of the computer games that are really popular with males are typically what? Territory and aggressive type games. Like I said, most of the times when it comes to males, no matter in what area of their life, they're typically looking to compete. And as society tries to drive that sort of mentality that men have just by nature, men will look to other outlets. And that's why so many men choose gaming over the women in their life.